What's up, everyone? This is Dariusz Kalbarczyk, co-founder of MG Poland, JS Poland, and this year AI Poland. Welcome back to Angular Master Podcast. Today, we have a very special guest from Graz, Austria. He is an excellent speaker, excellent teacher. He's my friend for many years. Manfred Steyer.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Hi, how are you?
I'm really fine. We are here at the GDE Summit in Berlin. I've met a lot of Google people and GDEs, so yeah, I have a good time.
Amazing. For those who don't know yet, please tell us about yourself.
Yeah, I'm Manfred Steyer. I'm a trainer and consultant for Angular, and I'm focusing on Angular in the enterprise. In this role, I and also my nice colleague help a lot of companies with Angular and with architecture. We do trainings there, we do consulting, reviews and development. And besides this, I'm also quite connected to the Angular community.
Manfred, what are the key principles that define solid architecture in Angular Enterprise app?
I think when it comes to a huge enterprise application, the most important aspect is slicing the application into parts. Of course, there are several aspects, but slicing is really important. At the end, you want to end up with slices that align with your team structure, so that each and every sub-team can work on just one slice of the overarching solution. But you also want to minimize dependencies between those slices so that you can change something here without breaking something there. And this is somehow more art than engineering, finding good candidates for slicing your system into such parts that fulfill all those characteristics. Ideas from domain-driven design, strategic design help there a lot.
Okay. When starting a new project, how do you decide wherever to go with a monolith or micro frontend architecture?
Yeah, good question. I'm a big fan of micro frontends and I invested a lot into this topic. I also helped a lot of companies with this topic. However, anyway, even though I like this topic, I'm not recommending it to everyone because sometimes it's not the right topic. Sometimes it would be too much of an overkill. So in general, you do micro frontends when you need autarkic teams. That means you need more than one team, and those teams cannot work together in a monorepository anymore. If they can work together in just one monorepository, this is the simplest solution. And this is also how Angular is intended to be used, also how it's used at Google. However, if for some reason this is not possible, because people are spread around the globe, they are sitting in different countries, or they have a completely different background in terms of technology or the business domain they are covering, then looking into micro frontends is very, very tempting. Because in this case, you end up with those slices I have mentioned before, and each slice becomes an application of its own. So there is quite a decoupling between the slices because applications cannot really easily access each other. And so you can do more or less what you want in your slice. You can do your best to provide business value in this very slice. Just one example, if you are a car manufacturer who has more than 80 teams around the globe, not 80 people, but 80 teams working on a really huge overarching system, then this is usually what you want. If you are just one team, then perhaps it's really an overkill. Anyway, if you want micro frontends to be successful, you also need a very small platform team. 2 people, 3 people that take care about the heavy liftings, that make sure that you have some guidance, good examples, perhaps some helper functions that solve some of the issues. Because you are leaving the space of a standard architecture, and so you need some solutions for some pitfalls that might arise, and you cannot expect from everyone to solve the pitfalls on their own. So you need some platform team that takes care of this.
Manfred, in your experience, what are the most common architecture mistakes to make with Angular?
Yeah, so I think the biggest mistakes is not thinking about the proper slicing up front, especially if the application is too huge, because in this case, you end up with several slices that are intermingled with each other, and then you try to change something here without breaking something there. Another thing I see is doing too much or too little, over-engineering or under-engineering. And yeah, sometimes it's difficult to find the right amount of doing things, the right sweet spot between over and under engineering. But also this is an issue I'm seeing for ages. Because, if you do too much, then you will have a lot of effort. And if you invest too little, then you will also have a lot of effort to make your architecture to be solid. Another thing is not to focus on your architectural goals. So usually your architectural goals are derived from your requirements and business goals and so on. And this is what you should aim for. So you don't do micro frontends because it's funny to play around with those technologies or because you have seen it on a conference. You don't use Redux because everyone else is using it. And you don't make everything a PWA, a progressive web application. No, you should really align with your business goals, with your requirements, which are reflected by your architectural goals. And this can also help to find the sweet spot between too much and too little. Finally, I think one of the most difficult jobs in single page applications is getting state management right. So I think we should at least think about how to manage state upfront. And if you say, well, services are good enough, go with it. If you say we need something like a Redux approach, go with it. Perhaps you find something in the middle like the lightweight NGRX signal store.
How do you balance flexibility and control when designing Angular module boundaries?
Yeah, so designing those module boundaries is really a difficult job. I mean, sometimes it's glass clear. Sometimes if we are talking about a business domain that is well understood, then it can be glass clear. It is glass clear that a shop has a shopping cart and there is an area with all your orders, and then there is an area where you can manage your ratings and so on. But this is not the case for each and every product you will implement, because the most business value you get out if you go into a new business domain that cannot be supported by a default product. And there you need to think a lot about proper module boundaries. To get this right, you need to have a sound understanding of your business process. You should look at your business process. There are some workshop formats to model the business process together with a lot of other people, like event storming, where you can bring all the knowledge together of technicians, architects, developers, but also of domain experts. And if you have this big picture in front of you, it's easier to find nice boundaries. And then, of course, each boundary or each area you identify there with its boundaries sometimes need to communicate with other areas. And I would say the rule of thumb is do it as much as needed and as little as possible. Because if you communicate too much or if you reuse too much from the other side, you create some coupling, and coupling is what you want to avoid. On the other side, you also want to avoid code duplication, so you are in some kind of tension field. You cannot have both, You cannot have your cake and eat it. You have to decide for one. And that's why this is quite a tension field. you need to evaluate on a per case basis in the light of your solution, of your architectural goals. This is where we go full cycle now.
So how will signals influence the architecture of Angular solutions?
Yeah, this is actually an interesting question because at first glance, signals are just simple, nice objects with getters and setters. However, if you start using it that way, you will run into sharp knives on a regular basis because this is not the idea. You would work against the whole design of signals if you stick with your current way of doing things and just call getters and setters. What you really need to do when working with signals is to switch your mind away from an imperative perspective where you think about your application of executing commands line by line, like do this, do that, do something else, switching it over to a more reactive way of thinking. And when you have a more reactive way of thinking, it's more about the data flow. It's not that much about the control flow in terms of do this and do that. It's more about the data that is reactively going through several stations of your application. It's a bit like a marble run, where the marble is sometimes split into several marbles and sometimes several marbles are joined to one marble. So if I come back to the idea of a web shop, then you might have your shopping basket and you put 2 articles into it. So this could be one marble, and this marble is projected to the amount of money you have to pay. But it can also be projected to the amount of items you have in there, because at some icon you want to see that you have 2 items in your shopping cart. So it's all about thinking about the data flow first, and the control flow there is more implicit. So at the end of the day, it's a shift in paradigm we need to practice and we need to get used to.
Okay, how do you approach state management in enterprise apps? Like, is Signal Store the new standard?
Yeah, that's also an important question. We discussed this, for instance, already yesterday or just yesterday in a workshop we did. So I think 7 years ago, if you have not done Redux, you would be one of the bad guys, because all the cool kids there used a Reduxy approach. But meanwhile, a lot of people, not only in the Angular space, but also in other communities, have seen that quite often Redux is too much. If you really have a sound use case for it, it can save your life. But if this is not the case, it's too much. And I feel this is true for the majority of business applications where state is not that global, where state is local to a given feature. So each of your features, each of your main menu items has its very own state. And quite seldomly, one feature needs state from another feature. And that's why, meanwhile, I'm a huge fan of lightweight stores like the NGRX Signal Store. I think the NGRX Signal Store is the most popular lightweight store in the Angular space. On average, if you look at the download numbers, every 4th Angular developer is using one library from the NGRX family. And this gives us a lot of trust, because when we talk about enterprise applications, we cannot afford to use a one-day wonder. We need something that works reliably and that is there for the next 10, 15, 20 years. And there currently NX is the best we can get, because it's the go-to solution in this space. And with this Signal Store, we have a nice lightweight solution. And if you find out you need a bit more, you need Redux, meanwhile, there is a Redux layer you can use on top of it, this event API. That means you can start lightweight. And if you really feel the need for something that is more powerful, but that also causes a bit more effort, you can put this layer on top. And to go full circle one more time, This is also in general a nice approach of agile architects, postponing your decisions to the last reasonable moment, which does not mean you are naive and you don't think about it. You just postpone it in a way that you can start lightweight. If you are lucky, you don't do over-engineering, you stick with a lightweight approach. But if you really, really need it and you feel it because you are in the middle of the project and you feel you need a bit more, you can add it anyway a bit later. And yeah, this helps you with finding the balance between over and under engineering.
Yeah, definitely. So what is your recommendation for managing shared logic, like interceptors, guards, pipes, across multiple apps?
Yeah, so if it is really shared logic, which is generic logic, then you need to put it in some kind of library. And then it depends upon whether you have a mono-repository approach or if you have several repositories. If it is a mono-repository approach, technically it's quite easy. It's just a shared library in this repository. You don't even need to assign a version number. It's just there. Everyone automatically gets the latest versions. And if you break it, you will find out immediately, because then you will also break some of the tests of the other applications in there. If this is not possible for you to put everything into one mono repository, well, then you are back with traditional NPM packages. You need to version them, you need to apply semantic versioning. Perhaps you want to go with some conventions for your Git commit messages that allow you to generate a nice change log to find out whether you need a new major or minor or batch version. So for those cases, you can add some automatisms. But in this case also, you need to publish it and then you need to install it. I've seen both of it. Both of it has advantages and disadvantages, different consequences. So usually one more time here, you need to find out what's in your current situation, the solution that brings less pain. I'm quite pessimistic there. I'm not saying that brings most advantages. I'm saying find a solution that brings less pain.
Exactly. Well said. What are your go-to tools and techniques for enforcing architecture boundaries in Angular workspace?
Yeah, so if you are lucky, you can define your boundaries just with folders. Also here, start as simple as possible. And when folders are enough, why not? No need to over-engineer. In this case, we use the open source project Sheriff, which can be configured with some rules, making sure that, for instance, this folder is not allowed to access that folder. So let's say we have two folders representing two areas of the real world, two business domains, as some people call it, or two bounded contexts. Then you can say this bounded context, let's say the shopping cart, is not allowed to directly access the rating system. Perhaps there are some well-defined APIs we are allowed to access, and those APIs needs to be backwards compatible, but we cannot use everything in there to avoid this intermingling. So Sheriff when you go with folders. If you need a bit more and if you go with libraries as your level of structure, then NX has a wonderful solution with the NX-based module boundaries. And there it's about the same. You can define which library is allowed to access which further libraries. If you go with micro frontends, then you are more isolated. One micro frontend cannot directly access another micro frontend. It's always a deliberate decision, depending on the technology you use. For instance, if you use federation, module federation, native federation, then you can only access parts from other applications that have been officially exposed for you. And in this case, you don't need additional tools. In this case, the fact that you cannot easily grab into a different applications shield your applications from other ones.
How do you handle cross-teams communication and API contracts in a multi-team Angular apps?
Yeah, that's also an important thing. I think there are two levels where we can answer this question. One level is how do we facilitate communication across teams? Because usually we talk more to our own team members than to members of other teams. And I think in this area, agility has taught us in different flavors that we need some kind of virtual teams. There are different names for this. If you look into scaling Scrum, or if you look into the Spotify model, or if you look into Less or the Safe model, there are different names and different flavors. But at the end of the day, it's all about having virtual teams. Some team members of all the teams are connecting and talking to each other about best practices or about stuff one team needs from the other team. This is on the organizatoric level. On the technical level, I think we should first of all be aware that we are dependent on other teams, that we cannot succeed without getting support from other teams. Often you cannot change it, but being aware of this makes you more comfortable with facing the reality as it is. Knowing that you can not force other teams to do everything you want because perhaps they are more powerful or they bring the money, brings you to the ground of reality. So it's expectation management, if you want to put it that way. And technically, you can ask them to provide an API. I think that's quite often the best solution, a little set of well-defined functionality, as small as possible, that needs to be backwards compatible. And if they cannot guarantee you that it will be backwards compatible, you can abstract their system on your side with some people call it anti-corruption layer or some gateway. Everything that is going to the outside is tunneled through this service layer you have there. And if you break something over there, or if something over there is broken, you just need to adjust this gateway layer, this service layer on your side. It's a bit like the hardware abstraction layer in Windows, the hardware is not a big matter for Windows itself because it's abstracted away by drivers. And if the hardware is changing, you adjust your driver, something like this. Of course, deliberately deciding not to share stuff also has some value. You don't need to share everything. As mentioned before, it's often a tension field between loosely coupling or low coupling on the one side and not repeating yourself on the other side. Often you cannot have both, and sometimes you find out, well, in order to minimize coupling, I'm not sharing stuff. And this might be a good idea if you feel, well, today it looks like the same, but it will evolve into different directions. Or if you say, well, it has the same name, but it has a different meaning. So let's just come back to the web shop. I like this example because everyone knows Amazon and web shops. A product in the shop system might not be the same than a product for invoicing. It looks quite differently when you need to sell it. You need a lot of pictures and different options. If it is a t-shirt, you need different sizes and colors and so on. When it comes to invoicing, you don't need to know all those options and pictures. You just need the name and what's the price. So you have a completely different perspective, and that's why sharing a product and a lot of functionality around the product might not even be necessary, so you can go separate ways, and also this reduces coupling.
So, $1 million question. If you could redesign any one part of Angular's architecture today, what would it be and why?
Oh wow, what would I do differently? I mean, it's really hard to say because, as a GDE, I work closely together with the Angular team, and that's why I really see how careful they are planning new stuff. and how much they take care of that it fits a mental model, that it is a logical addition to the system, and that it covers a lot of different use cases. But perhaps if I could change a little tiny thing, I know the Angular team is thinking differently about it, but I would integrate micro frontends a bit more to it, because I see out there in really huge companies with multi-team projects, it's really a huge job. I mean, we have the community for this currently, but of course, if you can have it as integrated part of the product, I would not say no. So perhaps this is a nice item for my wish list to the Christmas and to Santa Claus.
Amazing. Manfred, thank you. Thank you so much for this amazing discussion. It was a pleasure to host you here.
Same vice.
For all our listeners, please subscribe the channel, smash the button, ring the bell, and we see in next podcast. And of course on NG.js and AI Poland in November. Bye.